Viktor Petrov didn't just disappear from the Chernobyl control room on April 26, 1986. He vanished exactly 20 minutes before the reactor exploded, leaving behind only a radiation detector that was screaming warnings no one else could hear. For 33 years, Soviet records listed him as a deserter who abandoned his post during the world's worst nuclear disaster. But what satellite imagery discovered in 2019 would reveal that Viktor never really left Chernobyl at all, and his decades-long secret mission had been quietly saving lives in ways that would shock the scientific world. This is the story of a nuclear engineer whose disappearance became the greatest mystery of the Chernobyl disaster. A man who saw catastrophe in radiation readings, while his colleagues saw routine procedures, and whose vanishing act would turn out to be the most heroic decision in nuclear history. April 26, 1986, 1:03 a.m. Viktor Petrov, a 32-year-old reactor control specialist, burst into Control Room 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, his handheld radiation detector clicking frantically in the pre-dawn darkness. The night shift was conducting what they called a routine safety test on Reactor 4, but Viktor's readings were showing levels that made his blood run cold. Viktor had been monitoring radiation patterns around the facility for months as part of his doctoral research in nuclear engineering. Unlike the other operators who relied on the plant's built-in monitoring systems, Viktor carried his own equipment. A sensitive Geiger counter he had modified to detect minute changes in background radiation that the official instruments missed. What Viktor saw on his detector that night defied everything his colleagues believed about nuclear safety. The radiation levels weren't just elevated, they were climbing exponentially, following a pattern that could only mean one thing: the reactor core was becoming critically unstable. "Stop the test!" Viktor shouted to Deputy Chief Engineer Anatoly Dyatlov, who was overseeing the procedure. "The core temperature is spiking beyond safe parameters. We need to initiate emergency shutdown protocols immediately." Dyatlov glanced at the official control panel readings and laughed dismissively. "Petrov, your personal equipment is malfunctioning. The official instruments show everything is normal. The test continues as scheduled." But Viktor knew his equipment wasn't wrong. He had spent 3 years calibrating it against known radiation sources, and it had never failed him. The detector in his hand was showing radiation levels that shouldn't exist in a functioning reactor. Levels that indicated the uranium fuel rods were beginning to overheat beyond the cooling system's capacity to control them. For the next 15 minutes, Viktor watched in horror as his radiation readings continued to climb while the official plant monitoring systems registered normal levels. He realized with growing dread that the plant's built-in sensors had been compromised, possibly by the very procedures they were conducting. At 1:18 a.m., Viktor made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He looked at his radiation detector one final time. The needle was now pegging at maximum levels, indicating imminent core meltdown. He had 5 minutes, maybe less, before catastrophic failure. Viktor didn't run to evacuate the plant. Instead, he ran to save his family. His wife Elena and 8-year-old daughter Katya lived in the nearby city of Pripyat, just 3 kilometers from the reactor. If his calculations were correct, they had minutes before a radioactive cloud would engulf their apartment building. Viktor sprinted from the control room, jumped in his car, and raced toward Pripyat at speeds that should have killed him on the winding roads. At exactly 1:23 a.m., as Viktor was pulling into his apartment complex in Pripyat, Reactor 4 exploded with a force equivalent to 10 atomic bombs. The blast shattered windows across the city and sent a pillar of radioactive fire a kilometer into the night sky. Viktor's radiation detector, left behind in the control room, was found later buried under debris, its needle still pinned at maximum. Viktor had saved his family, but he had also become the only person to abandon the Chernobyl control room during the world's worst nuclear disaster. In the chaos that followed the explosion, as emergency crews battled to contain the radioactive inferno, Viktor made another decision that would define the rest of his life. He couldn't return to face charges of desertion, but he also couldn't live with the knowledge that his radiation expertise might be needed to help contain the disaster. So Viktor Petrov chose to disappear entirely, becoming a ghost who would spend the next 33 years secretly working to undo the damage he felt responsible for causing. In the immediate aftermath of the explosion, Soviet authorities conducted a massive search for Viktor. His official personnel file was classified, and he was listed as missing, presumed dead, in the initial casualty reports. When investigators found his abandoned radiation detector in the rubble of Control Room 4, they assumed he had been vaporized in the blast. But Elena Petrov knew her husband was alive. 3 days after the explosion, she found a note hidden in their apartment. "I am alive, but I can never come home. Trust no one from the government. Take Katya and go to your sister in Moscow. Never return to this place. I will find a way to make this right." Elena followed her husband's instructions, relocating to Moscow with their daughter, and never speaking publicly about Viktor's disappearance. For 33 years, she maintained the official story that her husband had died in the explosion, even as she received anonymous envelopes of money that appeared regularly in her mailbox. Viktor, meanwhile, had become something unprecedented in the history of nuclear disasters. A one-man decontamination operation working entirely in secret. Using his knowledge of radiation patterns and nuclear chemistry, he began a systematic campaign to neutralize radioactive contamination in the areas around Chernobyl that were too dangerous for official cleanup crews to access. Working only at night and using equipment he built from salvaged medical and industrial materials, Viktor spent decades collecting radioactive soil, treating it with chemical neutralizing agents, and storing it in lead-lined containers he buried in predetermined locations. His goal was ambitious and probably impossible: to single-handedly reduce the radiation levels in the Chernobyl exclusion zone to safe levels. Viktor's work required him to live like a hermit in the abandoned buildings around Chernobyl, moving constantly to avoid detection by the military patrols that guarded the exclusion zone. He scavenged food from abandoned stores, rigged solar panels to power his equipment, and became expert at avoiding the radiation detectors that would have revealed his presence to authorities. The breakthrough that would eventually expose Viktor's secret came from an unexpected source: environmental scientists using satellite imagery to monitor radiation recovery in the Chernobyl area. Doc. Sarah Reynolds, a radiation specialist at the International Atomic Energy Agency, was analyzing 30 years of satellite data when she noticed something that didn't make sense. The official cleanup efforts had focused on the most heavily contaminated areas, close to the reactor, but Dr. Reynolds was seeing radiation reduction in areas that had never been part of any official decontamination program. Even more puzzling, the reduction followed clear patterns that suggested systematic, organized effort rather than natural decay. In March 2019, Dr. Reynolds obtained access to new high-resolution satellite imagery from Google Earth that showed detailed radiation signatures across the Chernobyl exclusion zone. What she saw made her call an emergency meeting with her colleagues. There were clear signs of ongoing human activity in areas that had been officially abandoned for 33 years. The satellite images showed regular patterns of soil disturbance, vehicle tracks leading to specific locations, and most remarkably, radiation cool spots that appeared to be the result of deliberate decontamination work. Someone had been systematically cleaning up parts of Chernobyl for decades, and they had been doing it without any official authorization or recognition. Dr. Reynolds organized a drone reconnaissance mission to investigate the anomalies shown in the satellite imagery. On April 15th, 2019, 33 years and 2 weeks after the Chernobyl disaster, the drone team made contact with Viktor Petrov. The man they found was barely recognizable as the young engineer who had fled the control room in 1986. Viktor, now 65, was living in a reinforced underground bunker he had constructed beneath a collapsed apartment building in the abandoned city of Pripyat. His hair had gone completely white, his face was weathered by decades of radiation exposure, and his hands bore the scars of handling radioactive materials without proper protective equipment. But Viktor was alive, and more importantly, he had been working. The bunker contained 33 years' worth of radiation measurements, soil analysis reports, and decontamination records that Viktor had meticulously documented in dozens of handwritten notebooks. His data showed that he had successfully reduced radiation levels in a 15 square kilometer area around Chernobyl by an average of 40%. Viktor's methods were primitive but effective. Using chemical neutralization techniques he had developed through trial and error, he had been treating contaminated soil 1 square meter at a time, slowly expanding outward from his base in a careful pattern designed to create safe corridors through the exclusion zone. When Dr. Reynolds' team finally made contact with Viktor, his first words were not about himself, but about his work. "I have 33 years of data that might help you understand how radiation disperses in natural environments. I think I've found ways to accelerate the natural decontamination process." The reunion between Viktor and his family was arranged through careful diplomatic channels, as Viktor's legal status remained unclear. He was still technically listed as a deserter from his post at Chernobyl. Elena, now 63, had never remarried, telling people that her heart remained with her missing husband. Their daughter Katya, now 41 and a doctor in Moscow, had grown up believing her father was dead. The meeting took place in a secure facility in Kiev, with Elena seeing her husband for the first time in 33 years. Viktor's first words to his wife were an apology. "I'm sorry I couldn't come home. I had to try to fix what we broke." Viktor's research data was turned over to international nuclear safety organizations, where it revolutionized understanding of long-term radiation cleanup. His documentation of 3 decades of decontamination work provided invaluable insights into how radioactive materials behave in natural environments over extended periods. The International Atomic Energy Agency published a comprehensive report on Viktor's work in 2020, concluding that his solo decontamination efforts had accelerated radiation recovery in parts of the Chernobyl exclusion zone by an estimated 200 years. Areas that should have remained dangerous for centuries were now approaching safe levels, decades ahead of scientific predictions. Viktor's story also prompted a review of the official Chernobyl disaster records. When investigators examined the radiation readings from Control Room 4 on the night of the explosion, they found that Viktor's handheld detector had been recording accurate levels while the plant's built-in monitoring systems had been malfunctioning due to electromagnetic interference from the test procedures. The review concluded that if Viktor's warnings had been heeded, the Chernobyl explosion could have been prevented entirely. His decision to flee the control room was not an act of cowardice, but a desperate attempt to save his family when he realized that disaster was inevitable and imminent. In 2021, the Ukrainian government officially pardoned Viktor for deserting his post, acknowledging that his actions on the night of April 26, 1986, had been based on accurate scientific data that contradicted faulty official readings. He was posthumously awarded the Order of Merit, Ukraine's highest civilian honor, recognizing his 3 decades of secret service to nuclear safety. Viktor chose not to return to normal life after his rediscovery. At age 67, he felt his mission at Chernobyl was not yet complete. He continued living in the exclusion zone, but now with official support and proper equipment provided by international nuclear agencies. His underground bunker was expanded into a proper research facility, and he began training other specialists in his decontamination techniques. Viktor's work has become a model of us for long-term nuclear cleanup operations worldwide. His methods are being studied for application to other nuclear accident sites, and his documentation of 3 decades of radiation recovery has provided crucial data for improving nuclear safety protocols. The story of Viktor Petrov demonstrates that sometimes the greatest heroism comes not from facing danger, but from accepting responsibility for preventing future harm. His decision to disappear from official records allowed him to work without bureaucratic interference, accomplishing more in 33 years of secret effort than official cleanup operations had achieved with unlimited resources. Elena and Viktor now divide their time between his research facility in the Chernobyl exclusion zone and a small apartment in Kiev. Their daughter Katya has joined her father's work, using her medical training to study the long-term health effects of radiation exposure on cleanup workers. Viktor's radiation detector, the same device that warned him of the impending disaster in 1986, is now on display at the Chernobyl Museum in Kiev. Next to it is a simple placard that reads, "This instrument detected the disaster that officials couldn't see." Sometimes the most important warnings come from those brave enough to trust their own observations over official assurances. Today, Viktor Petrov is recognized as one of the world's leading experts on nuclear decontamination, but he remains haunted by the knowledge that 31 people died in the Chernobyl explosion because his warnings went unheeded. His life's work has been an attempt to ensure that no one else will ever pay the price for ignoring inconvenient scientific truth. Viktor's story teaches us that heroism sometimes requires disappearing from the spotlight rather than seeking it. For 33 years, he worked in complete anonymity, asking for no recognition and expecting no reward except the knowledge that he was making the world a little bit safer. His legacy lies not in the medals or honors he eventually received, but in the countless lives he saved through decades of patient, invisible work. The Google Earth images that revealed Viktor's secret are now used in environmental monitoring courses around the world as an example of how modern technology can uncover hidden patterns of human activity. His story has become a case study in both nuclear safety and the power of individual determination to address seemingly insurmountable problems. As Viktor often tells the international scientists who now visit his facility, the radiation detector doesn't lie, and it doesn't care about politics or official procedures. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is trust your instruments and act on what they tell you, even when everyone else says you're wrong.